Hey there, Fabulous Flock. Today we're going to talk about today's lesson. When you're doing your lesson preview time, that's the time when you're just watching the video, you're not taking notes. But when you're doing Miss Jones's Math Talk notes, I want you guys to go in your house somewhere, grab a notebook or something like that so that you can write down your strategy steps in your Math Talk notes. You can use these later when you're doing a problem or something like that in Nearpod, or when you're doing one of your activities or projects. So I highly suggest that you take this time right now to get out some paper or a pencil or something you can write notes with. All right, let's get started with Miss Jones' Math Talk strategy notes. Today, our strategy is going to be used in order to solve unit fraction by unit fraction problems, meaning it is a fraction times a fraction problem. So when we are multiplying two fractions with each other. One thing I do want to say before we get started is if you want, I will be grading tests and sending them back this week. And if you want to, you have an opportunity to retake your test to get a score that you would like. If you got a score that you did not like, 2 or 3 or 1, you have an opportunity to retake your test. This opportunity you have until I'll give you a couple weeks to get that done, but try to get it done as soon as possible because we are continuing to learn new things, and it's harder to go back and redo those tests when the information is not as fresh in your mind. So if you do want to redo your test, go look at the grade that I gave you, or wait for me to grade your paper and I'll send it back to you on Google Classroom, and then I will give you a little message and you can respond with, "Yes, Miss Jones, I would like to retake my test." All right, let's jump into the lesson now. So the first thing I'm going to do, since this is a word problem, is I'm going to use my cubes to circle, underline, box, and highlight and elaborate on important information that I see in the problem. So I know Jan is her name. Thank you, Jan. I'm going to put a box over Jan. Had 3/4 of a pan of Rice Krispie treats, or crispy rice treats. So I know 3/4 pan of. Okay, so 3/4 of the whole pan is what she has. Then she sent 1/3 of the whole of this 3/4 of the treats to school. What fraction of the whole pan did she send to school? Well, I know that 3/5 of a whole is 3/5. So she has 3/5 of Rice Krispie treats at home. Then she sent 1/3 of those 3/5 of treats that she had to school. So I know that the problem that I'm dealing with here is 1/3 of 3/5 a pan of Rice Krispie treats. And I know that because of what I've learned in the past lessons in this module, that 1/3 of means 1/3 times 3/5. Because when I'm working with fractions, if I want to find a portion of a fraction, I can just multiply that fraction times the number. If I want to find a portion of a whole number, I multiply it. And if I want to find a portion of a fraction, I multiply it. So now we're working with 1/3 of 3/5. And we want to find out that answer. So in order to do that, we need to first write it as a problem and expression. Good. We evaluated the problem and then we wrote it as an expression. So we're done with step 1. Step 2. We need to separate the model to represent the first fraction. The first fraction in my problem is 1/3. So I'm going to create a model that represents 1/3. I like to label all my parts to show all that I know. I know if I use 2 lines, I separate 3 portions. I'm going to highlight 1/3 because this model needs to represent 1/3, and I need to show that in my highlight, and I'm just going to label it 1/3. My model represents 1/3, which is my first fraction. All right, step 3, the model to represent the second fraction. So I'm going to draw a model to represent 3/5, which is my second fraction over here, 3/5. But when I draw my model to represent 3/5, I want to add it to my model that already represents 1/3. So I'm going to draw my 1, 2, 3, 4 lines so I can separate 5 sections. But I need to add it to my model that already represents 1/3. So when you guys are at home, you're just going to draw this on top of your model that represents 1/3. But because I'm showing you the steps on my iPad, I'm going to have 2 models here. But at home, you should have one model that you're continuously building to. All right, so your model should look like this now. You should have 1/3 shaded in, and you should have your 3/5 lines drawn. And so now you're going to find the portion that represents 3/5, and that is this right here. You're going to label it as 3/5. Remember, we like to label all that we know so that when the person who's looking at our math is looking at it, they can see all of the things that we know. So now that we have labeled 3/5, we've added to our model that already represented 1/3. We need to shade in the portion that represents 3/5, just as we did in our model that represents 1/3. So here's 1/5 being shaded, 2/5 being shaded, and now 3/5 being shaded. All right, so now that I have my problem represented in a model, I need to find out what are these new boxes that we have created by shading the model, what value those new boxes represent. Because now we have a model with these smaller boxes, and I want to know what value do these smaller boxes represent in our model. The only way to find out is to find out how many boxes we have in our model altogether now that we have created these new portions. All right, so I have 1, 2, 3 on this side, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on that side. So I know 3 times 5 is 15, which tells us we have 15 boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 boxes. Here I have 1, 2, 3 boxes that are shaded by both red and orange, meaning that it represents what 3/5 of 1/3 is. These 3 boxes that are shaded twice, that are overlaid, represent what 1/3 of 3/5 is. Because if I take 1/3 of the 3/5, the amount that's available is here in the overlay. And I have 3 of them. So I have 15 boxes. So that means that the amount represented in this part is 3/15, which is essentially the answer to our question. So 1/3 of 3/5 is 3/15, period. She took to school 3/15, or, and the reason why I'm going to say or is because I know that 3/15 is not a simplified fraction. I know that if I took 3 and I divided it by 3, I would get 1. And I took 15 and divided it by 3, I would get 5. So, or 1/5 of the treats to school. So now we know that she took 1/3 of 3/5, which is 3/15. She took to school 3/15, or 1/5 of the treats to school. We know this because we did our steps. Step 1, we looked at the fraction, we pulled it out of our out of our word problem, and created an expression. Then we represented this expression, in a model using the first fraction and then second fraction. We used that model to find out the amount that was represented. So we can always check our math over here in step 4 by just using a multiplication problem. 1/3 times 3/5 equals, 1 times 3 is 3, and 3 times 5 is 15. 3/15 equals 1/5. And so we checked our answer. All right, I hope you guys understand these steps. If you have any questions about these steps today or today's lesson, please call me, email, text me, or do a comment under Google Classroom. This lesson is going to be pretty fast for you guys because multiplying fractions is one of the easier things. I want to say adding and subtracting fractions is definitely harder. And so now that we're getting into multiplying fractions, things are going to move faster because we do know our multiplication facts. And we're just going to multiply those things and keep on moving. So let me know if you have any questions. I'll be here to help. Thank you, Fabulous Flock, and have a great day.